Hello, Franklin County. On this week's episode of Talk of the County, we're proud to feature a panel discussion amongst the commissioners from their State of the County luncheon about their work as equity champions and the future of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I know you're going to enjoy it.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I'm so excited to be here with all of you, some familiar faces, some new faces, but definitely a collaborative effort because we could not do business as a county by ourselves. We do it with all of you here in the room. And I am so grateful to not only work, live, and play in a county where I have county leaders who deem it important to serve our residents in the very best way. And I am excited about this panel. I'm excited to hear what our commissioners and county administration have to say. They have been working really hard and champion DEI and its efforts and the work that we have been doing. I have been doing county government for 23 years, and I have to say this is the best county that I have worked for in the state of Ohio, and the best folks that I have worked for, to be able to have that support not only for me and our division and moving forward. So let's get right into the discussion, shall we? So in 2019, the commissioners and county administration began an initiative to analyze the causes of poverty and what we know right now as a Rise Together Poverty Blueprint, which quickly revealed that you can't talk about poverty without talking about systemic racism. Then in 2020, you declared racism as a public health crisis and added racial equity as one of your core principles on how we do good governance. What has that commitment looked like over the past 4 years, and how has racial equity landscape changed since 2020? Commissioner Boyce, Commissioner Crawley, Administrator Wilson?
I sat here so I could go last. Can you hear me okay? No, they can't hear me.
Did you touch your mic?
Come on.
There you go.
All right. Commissioner Crawley looked at me and said, "Did you turn it on?" No. I got to turn it on? Yeah, I didn't know that. Anyways, so think about what was happening in our country in 2020. George Floyd had been murdered in Minneapolis, and we saw unrest all over the country because I really believe that it started a new chapter in American history where cities and counties should bring up something. Okay. Cities and counties are better up higher. Okay. That better? Okay, thank you. All right. Well, cities and counties. All right. I feel like I'm just talking it. Understood this way. Where cities and counties, I think we're awakened to really look in the mirror and say to themselves, what can we do better? And for us in Franklin County, it was a number of things. One, it was working with our sheriff department to outfit our law enforcement officers with body cameras. But it's not as simple as just saying we're going to order new body cameras. You know, you have to think through policy and procedure, and quite frankly, it's a cultural change for law enforcement. And so it's not as simple as it may seem. But that, to me, was the very beginning of a change that hadn't happened since the beginning of Franklin County. And it's that kind of nuance that I think has given Franklin County a new life in how we look at diversity, equity, and inclusion. Secondly, finally, I'll just say, we also zeroed in with our Racial Equity Council to ensure that we were doing our part to make sure that business owners had an opportunity to do business with Franklin County, and that we opened up our doors to women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, to veteran-owned businesses, not just for the purpose of inclusion, but also to ensure that we're getting the best product. You know, because that's really what the DE&I conversation is about. Yes, it's inclusion, but it's also ensuring that we're opening up the net, casting the net, so that we get the very best product that we can possibly get. And I think that's the difference that we've seen over the last 4 years since the 2020, since George Floyd's death. And if there was a silver lining in such a harsh tragedy, it was opening our eyes to how we can be better as a county and as a community. And I think we've taken a few of those steps.
Absolutely. Thank you. Commissioner Crawley or Administrator
Well, I'll
Wilson?
defer to Administrator Wilson because I wasn't here 4 years ago. I haven't even been here 3 years just yet. So I'll let him chime in and then I can go.
Thank you. When the pandemic hit, we were, as a county, already aware of many of the disparities, particularly when we talk about economic segregation and the lack of economic mobility in certain parts of our community. So just imagine when the pandemic hit. There's an old adage that when the majority of America has a cold, communities of color and marginalized communities have the flu. So now we have a global pandemic. We had the realization to know just what that means to communities of color. So we can't just, at that point, express words. It was very important that the declaration was made to make racism a public health crisis. But something this Board of Commissioners did, they tied that to 10 actions that were not just lightweight things that county administration and the agencies under the Board of Commissioners needed to carry out. And the same goes with declaring racism and racial equity, linking that to the core principles of everything that we do. We talk about it being in our value set. We talk about show me your budget and I'll know what your priorities are. So during the pandemic, investments have been made, particularly targeted at African American communities, communities of color, to give them an opportunity to, at a time of crisis, be able to seek out opportunity. The development of Freedom Equity came out of the pandemic, which was the first in this community now CDFI that is unapologetically focused on putting capital in the hands of those that in the past went to the bank and got an answer of no, where others may have got an answer of yes. So we worked with partners like the Columbus Urban League to accomplish that. We created an equity fund where we gave loans to and grants to small business owners as a part of all of this. We've distributed over $40-some-odd million in emergency rental assistance because we know the importance of someone being able to keep a roof over their head. So it's been not about talk, it's been about action. And I credit this Board of Commissioners for allowing me as the administrator to lead those efforts.
Absolutely.
I think what I would add is before we could even really serve the community and our organizations, we had to look internally, right? Like if we're going to declare racism as a public health crisis or make racial equity a core principle of good governance, we had to really look internally and say, does our staff reflect the community? Is our staff and our agencies under the Board of Commissioners reflective of the community in which we serve? What are the thoughts, beliefs, and values that we hold as employees serving the community? So, one of the things that we changed is making sure that when we're onboarding new employees that they understand the Rise Together Poverty Blueprint Plan. What the community said that they wanted. The Poverty Blueprint Plan is our framework for doing business, for what the community said that they wanted to see. It was made for the community, by the community, and one thing, and I know one of the questions we'll talk about is the first thing that they said is like we can't really remove barriers if we don't identify racism as being a problem. So leading the work, Chief, looking internally at our agencies. We've had agencies that are predominantly white men and not inclusive of women, and we're changing that to have more women and more people of color. Also people with disabilities, those are who are differently able. When we think about DEI or inclusion, oftentimes, people who are differently able feel like they're left out of that conversation, and I know that you're working hard to make sure that people are inclusive. I think the other thing that's important that we have done and that we're very focused on, especially when we make board appointments. So the commissioners appoint to more than 40 boards and commissions, right? So we're talking about Adam H, we're talking about CODA, we're talking about, large nonprofits. What was those boards looking like? What was the makeup? These are our designees. These are people who are serving at the pleasure of the commissioners. And do these boards reflect, or are appointees reflecting the community? And is it inclusive? And then I would say the other thing that we have been really focused on when we talk about investment, and this has come up a lot in community partnerships, is what does the board makeup of the organizations in which we're funding look like? Do they have a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion? Are they committed to making sure that those who are the most vulnerable or the most at risk are getting opportunities and being inclusive? So I think since I've been to the board, and I love the fact that I got to join a board of commissioners that had already declared racism as a public health crisis, because I came from the legislature, and me and my former colleague, Stephanie House, had introduced a bill to declare racism as a public health crisis, and they wouldn't even bring it forward. Wouldn't even let us have a hearing. And then finally we had one hearing before I resigned to come down to the Board of Commissioners, and it was like, well, we're really not gonna move this if you don't change the name racism to discrimination. I was like, I'm unwilling to do that. And State Rep House at the time, now Councilwoman House, we were unwilling to do that. Like, we're gonna call a thing, right? And we can't really address the thing unless we identify and be unapologetic about what we're talking about here. And so I love the fact that I get to work with administration and two colleagues who continues to prioritize our investments, but also making sure when we talk about inclusion, that everyone in Franklin County feels like this is a place that they could live, work, and play and raise a family. Because if you talk to people, they feel like, there are some that are doing really well in the county, and then there are some who feel like they've been left behind and that people have forgotten about them. And this board has not forgotten about anyone.
Yes, thank you.
Can I just add something? Commissioner Crawley made me think of something. Two things. One, 7 years ago, when I started on the Board of Commissioners, I became the first African American in the history of Franklin County to serve as a member of the Board of Commissioners. And just a couple of years later, now we have a majority of the board is minority. It's a majority board. And that's never happened in the history of Franklin County. And I think why that's important is because it also sets forward the values of this community. And it says to us what the value set is of Franklin County. And so we know that it's not just a fad or a saying. It is the value set of Central Ohio, and we feel obligated to carry that out. Commissioner Crawley and I, to some extent Commissioner O'Grady, we talk about this all the time, and we prioritize it in a way that is reflective in, as Administrator Wilson said, in our budget, in our priorities, and even through D&I. If you remember when you first became director, I said, hey, tell me what you need budget-wise. Don't. This is not some gratuitous position where you just come in and make recommendations. You tell me what you need, and we'll get you that. And let's set the bar for the entire country. And I believe that we're working our way to do that.
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Definitely. Let's get them a hand clap, because so many things have happened outside of the George Floyd tragedy. You've seen a lot of organizations across America adding a DEI division, making notes that we needed to focus on racism. But what were you really doing? And Commissioner Crawley said, you want to call a thing and call it out and be unapologetically about it, and make sure that we are put in action. And what this Board of Commissioners and our county administration have done has put things into action. And you should be commended. And not only put into action, but Commissioner Boyce just mentioned one of our first conversations about the budget. And I often remember that. I go back to that. I talk to my staff about that, because you challenged. You challenged me, you challenged the staff, you challenged the DEI division to make sure that the work and the actions that we were doing were going to remain sustainable. And you are to be commended for the work that you are doing, and while we're having this conversation today. Let's talk about equity for a moment, because folks get equity confused with equality, and that's not fair. So let's just dive into that subject. When people talk about equity, we often think of it as a race issue. but you've tried to embrace a fully inclusive culture that also supports women, immigrants, our LGBTQIA+ community, and more. Why do you think it's important to be active and a seen partner in all of these different spaces?
I'll lead off. I mean, it's just interesting that we have the conversation still around equality and equity. And they are far apart. They've been illustrated. Equity does not assume that we all start at the same place. Equality would assume that we all are at the same place, and you give us the same resources, and we all should have the opportunity through the work of ourselves, blood, sweat, and tears, and you should be responsible for the result. Mm-hmm. But that's not Franklin County, that's not America. We all have different, unique needs that you have to speak to. You see the illustration that uses the analogy of height and a fence, and everybody need a different size box to stand on to be able to see over that fence. That's really what equity is all about. You know, it's not about, in many of our policies, and under this board, we try to be intentional to think about one size don't fit all. You can't give every child the same size shoe and say run a marathon. Mm-hmm. They gotta have the shoe that fits. And then with the proper nurturing and coaching, then they will be able to achieve results with the proper motivation and training and being in the proper environment and having those health and human services around them. And equity is that's what equity is about. And that's why we have to elevate the conversation about equity. And you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity is a reality in Franklin County when we look at our population of 1.35 million people. And equity I just talked about. And inclusion is policymakers, administration, making a conscious choice to give people a space, but not only a space in the room, but a space that they feel comfortable in that room and expressing themselves. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would add to that and say, when I think about equity, one of the phrases that comes to mind is when people say everyone should just pull themselves up by their bootstraps. But the assumption is that everybody has boots, right? Which is not the case. And so, you know, since we have a majority minority board, and we have been focused on addressing racism, addressing discrimination, and sexism, everybody isn't on board with that, right? Like, people want to know, why are we making investments just for minority businesses, right? So we created the CDFI Freedom Equity because during the pandemic, a lot of small and minority businesses, emerging businesses, didn't have the relationships with large banks, right? And so they weren't getting PPP loans, and they were seeing their doors close. They had to close their business, lay off people, and it was just having an impact where other businesses that had those relationships with larger banks were getting those loans and able to stay open. Well, in order to mitigate that, we're like, let's create something that will put capital in the hands of business owners who don't have those relationships, right? That matters. Or when we did the investment with the City of Columbus to support small and emerging businesses, I think we ended up putting $8 million over 2 years, so $4 million a year. It's important to do that. Everybody doesn't have the same relationships. We know historically banks have been discriminating against Black businesses, women-owned businesses, and that's something that we continue to rectify, especially even when we look at housing. We know that redlining was a thing. We know that we continue to see the impacts in our community from redlining, and where people couldn't get loans. Home ownership continues to be a problem. And so we are clear that we serve all of our residents, but everybody's not starting at the same starting point, and therefore we need to make strategic investments so those who feel like they've been left behind, and truthfully have been left behind, can at least catch up and be on the same playing field.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that is very well said by both my colleagues here. The only thing I'll add to that is in 2018, we launched an effort where we brought together many of our collaborators and partners to really study poverty in Central Ohio. Yeah, I know former council member Charlie Tavares was on that committee, and I know I saw some others that were a part of that group. But we brought in a consultant that helped us study this, and in the findings that they provided us after a year-long meeting effort was that racism was at the core of some of our challenges. And somebody said earlier, call it a thing is a thing. Is that what you said? Something like that, yeah. It's what my grandmother used to say, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, then damn it, it ain't a frog. and so if it's in poverty, that's the same thing. It is what it is. And we know that racism is connected to that. And so we made a very conscientious and deliberate decision to address that. And so we formed the Rise Together Institute. I see Danielle here, sitting here, who is leading our effort for big ideas. So, and I bring that up because by no means are we finished yet. By no means do we have all the answers. By no means is Central Ohio and Franklin County a finished product of this discussion or work. Quite frankly, we're at the very beginning of that discussion. And you think that Franklin County existed for far more time before there was ever an African American or an African American woman as a commissioner. And today, that's a majority of the board. That means we're making progress, but it also means we've got a lot of work to do.
And I'll just add, I mean, it took 220 years to get to me.
Yeah.
Right? First woman of color.
Right.
And because it has taken so long and government is slow, like I go into a lot of rooms where I am the only, I am the only woman, not even just the only woman, person of color, I am the only woman. And so I think when we talk about equity or an inclusion, it's usually from, as you point out, like a race perspective. But we're talking about a veteran. I'm a veteran, and I'm often only in the room, but just being a woman and going into rooms with a lot of men all the time, like we got a long way to go. And I know at the board, we're very much focused on women being included as well.
Definitely a lot of progress made.
So I just want to add one point that because I want to point out how it does make a difference when there is a woman at a table or when there's different perspective to teach you. When Commissioner Crawley came on, she was the very first person to raise doulas. In the role of doulas in healthcare and for women and in the birth process. And I'm going to be honest with you, I was like, I don't know anything about this. Like, what is that? And the point is that, but for her leadership in the conversation around the value and the role that plays in households, and particularly with the maternity rates and so forth, you know, it to me was something I would not have been exposed to. But for her leadership, I can go on and on about from early childhood education and different things, and we collaborate on these things. So it's she brings perspective, I bring perspective, John brings perspective, but more importantly, it represents the broad scope of Central Ohio and the diversity of Central Ohio, and that to me is how it really does make a difference to be inclusive and to have a diverse group leading whatever the agency or entity is.
Absolutely, and our representation matters so much. And even the intersectionality that you talked about, Commissioner Crawley, with being a Black woman, being a veteran, and how that goes to our inclusive efforts and the things that we are doing here at the county. And what you heard so far is not only those actionable items, but making sure that voices are lifted externally and that we are collaborating with our community partners, with our internal staff. You all mentioned earlier our Racial Equity Council, and part of the Racial Equity Council was an initiative through our county administration that is really an extension of our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Division. As well as that strategic effort, we completed a cultural climate audit, the first time that an audit was done, to identify the mindset of what our staff thought about diversity, equity, and inclusion back in July 2021. And some of those statistics said that 85% of Franklin County employees believe a diverse workforce is more successful than a culture that does not include equity. This board has been unapologetically passionate in their approach and goals in creating a diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplace and community, which is why they have invested $21 million in minority-owned businesses, spent $14 million uplifting women-owned businesses over the past year in 2023. What are you doing to ensure that your own team accurately affects the community you serve? And you talk some about that, about being a majority minority board. But what else? How does that reflect in our organization?
Oh, I can? Yeah, I can start. No, I think what you see as far as like administration, and when I think about our directors over our 14 agencies, it is very much reflective. Like you have Black women leading, you have white women leading, you have inclusive of LGBTQIA plus individuals, you have men leading, and you have diversity in African or white or just African American. We are inclusive of those who have disabilities, Jewish people. When I first came to the county, my own personal staff, I had a young white woman, a Jewish woman, a Black woman, and then me. And now I have 2 Black women and getting ready to hire a Black man. And so you see a representation of the community. And then as we hire more staff, we hire people who are knowledgeable and are experienced, but we are very much looking at how does this bring more diversity to the county? How does and that's why when we even have our, Administrator Wilson can speak to this a lot, when we have our hiring process, there's multiple people on those calls. So it's not just the person that's doing the hiring. They bring people from different agencies to sit on that call. Usually it's about 4 or 5 individuals, even on the initial interview. And then on the second round of interviews, you have more people who are from different backgrounds, different walks, interviewing and asking questions. So we can very much hire what the community looks like.
Absolutely.
The only thing I'd add to that, as well said, is that it also transfers in procurement. That's where I like to see the measurement. When we built, it's not something fun to talk about when you say you built a jail. But that jail was a $350 million plus project, and embedded in a $350 million new jail are the services and resources that we can use to serve our residents. And I'm proud to say that we did that almost 30%, Chris, almost 30% of that went to minority-owned companies. I mean, that's a lot of money. That is. And honestly, that was the first project that the county, in the history of Franklin County, was able to do that, where we set goals in the contracts we're getting. Councilmember Favors, you'll appreciate this. We had I'm not taking credit for this. Before I got to the county, we couldn't. You obviously can't have set-asides, but what you can have is we challenged the prosecutor at the time to say, can we have goals? And finally, after a lot of conversations and discussions, the prosecutor at the time agreed that we could set goals. But here's the thing, community. Why he did that, and I'll just recognize former prosecutor Ron O'Brien for this. Why he did that was when we were out campaigning, he heard that in the community. He heard that we were at candidates nights and they presented that to him. We want to see more, and we want to see the peanut butter being spread, if you will, through procurement. And so when we came back that year after election, we said, can we have this conversation again? And he said, yeah, I think it's time to have that conversation. And so he approved, because we have to get the prosecutors, I think Councilmember Favors knows this, we have to get the prosecutors' support for that kind of goal. And he did. And not only did we meet the goal, but we exceeded it significantly. And through our D&I efforts, we continue to exceed that kind of performance every single week. Every time we have a Board of Commissioners meeting, they have to provide us, the Board of Commissioners, with a report on how we're doing with regards to every single contract that goes out about D&I and inclusion, D&I. Every single contract, and that's different. That's not how we did business before, and that's how we do business today, and it makes a difference. Because everybody's on the hook. Quite frankly, I'm sitting there thinking, you said 85%, I'm thinking of the 15% who don't have that value set.
Right.
Yeah, and so because that's something that we really believe deeply, and we see it every day, and it comes out in the procurement process that you're always a part of on Tuesday mornings.
Yes.
Additionally, this board set up a construction inclusion team that you all appointed members to that serve as a body that follows the principles that you all laid out. And our monitoring not only construction, but workforce participation. Are people from the community monitoring who's working on the projects? So that is something that
Senator
has
Tavares
been,
is
that
leading
has
our
emphasized.
construction.
Senator Tavares in our audience. So you all had that in place after we, on our first project, the Franklin County Forensic Science Center and the James A. Kearns Correction Center. Both of those projects had aspirational goals tied to them. And every project thereafter will have aspirational goals tied to them. I was in a meeting just yesterday in the Franklin County Crisis Center. That is a $63 million project that Adam H. Is spearheading with the county's assistance. Is at 31%, as we said, at about the midway point of construction. So we are leveling up as a community and setting a new standard.
And I'll just add, too, I'm glad you raised that point, Administrator, but the City of Columbus has been great partners with us as well. As many of you know, we're building a new terminal at the airport. I mean, Central Ohio is growing, and as a part of that growth, we've got to build a new airport, essentially. And embedded in that conversation is that didn't exist before, is that those projects, that it's $2 billion, is that something like $2 billion project? Embedded in that conversation is the same inclusion conversation that we had about the jail and about the other places. But we partnered with the City of Columbus to set that standard with the airport because we're both joint owners of the airport, or at least we appoint the board that's owners of the airport. And so that standard is embedded now in agencies outside of the City of Columbus, outside of Franklin County. And that's where you see real growth in DE&I, when other agencies understand, hey, that's the value set by the City of Columbus and Franklin County, we need to hold that too. And so for that project, and we've been in heavy negotiations about that, and everyone that's involved has held firm on the fact that there will be an inclusion goal of 25% plus. And that's progress. That's progress.
Commissioner Crawley.
I don't know where we are on time, but I would just add that even when it comes to our investments, when it comes to public-private partnerships, if we're even talking about affordable housing or mixed use and people are seeking county dollars, we have a requirement. Like, well, what is the minority participation? Our goal is this, and if you want our investment, like, are you willing to work towards that? And we even have a public-private partnership for the North Market. That's going to be a hotel as well as apartments. And we even asked for it to be included in the contract for Experience Columbus. They're here. They have a workforce development program to get people in the hospitality industry into middle management, which had been a problem for years, and the pandemic exacerbated that. So outside of making sure that we have affordable housing component, but the people who are going to be working there, who's going to be building it. So when we talk about the tower or the Forensic Science Center or the child care center that we're getting ready to build after we demolish the jail, what does participation look like from a minority perspective as well as gender? But then also people who are going to be working there, what is your goal as well? So, I mean, we go deep.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
We do. And we have hard, necessary conversations. And not only are we held accountable by our residents and partners like you, but we also make sure that we're leading in the conversations to say that these are our measures and what we want you to follow. And not just being a great funding partner, but a collaborative, on the boots, we'll be there with you, having these hard, necessary conversations as partners. And I love that not only does our board do that, but that seeps through all of our county leaders in the county. Another thing that's one of the things that they pointed out is that our people look to Franklin County to see how are you leading, how are you guiding, how are you building standards, making sure and wanting to say, what is the county doing? How can I work to incorporate these practices into my organization? And so many of us, Commissioner Boyce and Commissioner Crawley and Commissioner O'Grady, myself and Administrator Wilson and other county leadership work really hard with our national partners through a National Association of Counties, and we are at the table. Our voice is heard. heard, what we're doing is looked at as best practices. And so with that being said, lots of jurisdictions across the country have limited or even dismantled their DEI practices. So much to say they can't even say diversity, equity, and inclusion, have training. You see so many legislation has passed that provides even more oppression in our communities. And so we've been doing the work for quite a while now with progress that we can point to, so many accomplishments as you have already talked about. But what do you think the future holds? We talk a lot about sustainability. We talk a lot about how this division of diversity, equity, and inclusion, although we've been doing this work for a long time, now it sits somewhere, you have something to call it. What does sustainability look like? And how does the path forward look for this work? And why do you think it's important to continue to create a workplace culture and society that dedicates itself to inclusion and equity?
I'll start off, just say that, as we said earlier, there's not a place in Central Ohio you can't go and see a crane in the sky or orange barrels on the street. I mean, we are growing. Even our highways are expanding. And so as we grow, I think that we will become more diverse. We will become more advanced. And, with the new Intel project, I mean, that is a lifetime kind of project that has implications for generations to come. And so I think what you're going to see is that as a value set, not just of Franklin County, Central Ohio, but of the region. And when you see that, truly you'll have what I would say is an anchor in the Midwest to lead the way for the country. And I only see it getting better.
Mm-hmm.
I would just echo that. I think as we continue to grow, I would like to see some of our other municipalities have a focus in this area when it even comes to like housing and transportation. There are many who feel like they're left out. I was on a panel up in Dublin for Leadership Dublin, and there are some townships, and I know our township association, the president is here, and I'm sure he understands and knows well for his members that everybody is not on board for having an inclusive community. They're actually standing in the way of progress. But I say all the time, development is going to happen. It can happen to you or it can happen with you. Mm-hmm. And the community will speak. Their voices will be heard. And people need to have a place to live. They need to have a safe place to live. Columbus can't hold everyone. It is growing outside of the city. We're responsible, I won't say responsible, but we have like 42 jurisdictions that are in Franklin County, and we would love for every one of them to be a partner, but they are not. So I think there's work to be done. But I think it will be the community members, our neighbors, who moves that community to be more inclusive, to be more diverse, to champion the things that they want to see. It can't always be the top down. I very much believe it should be bottom up, and those who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution. Absolutely. So just having them to be at the table as decisions are being made about where investments go when it comes to CODA and Link Us, like what they would like to see. We know in places where they have had a levy on the ballot that has failed. It has failed in places where the community felt like they didn't see a value for them. They didn't see how it was going to benefit them or their life, how it was going to make a difference. And so when we think about these large initiatives that are coming, that are happening, we need to make sure that the community is at the table and being part of the decision makers, because that's where they live.
Absolutely. Administrator?
Engagement is the key, in my opinion. In order to provide an opportunity for everyone and organic action, all of the residents need to engage in the process and participate in the process. And every resident should think about, what is my agenda as an individual to advance myself individually, my family, my community, my church, my circle, and bond together with others. And if you do that, inclusion will be an organic action. If people participate in the process and ensure that their administrators and their elected leaders reflect their interests and their well-being.
I think what I heard today is that collaboration is so important, that we want to hear from the community. We want to hear from our collaborative partners, and we're moving forward.
Can I ask something real quick? And
Yeah.
we could get the heaters back on in a minute because it's hot up here. My fingers are freezing. But what I will say is it's disappointing when I come to general session or I come to briefing, I see the same faces as county leadership, but I don't see anybody from the community. And so as I've been having these coffee and conversations or cones and conversations with Crawley, and I'm representing my colleagues in administration and what we do, because people don't know what commissioners do, we would love to see people show up. We would love to have people's input. We move a $2.2 billion budget. People are so focused on the city of Columbus. That is our largest municipality. It's not the only one. We have a larger budget than they do, right? Like when it comes to our investment, we move millions of dollars every week. This is your dollars. These are your dollars. You should have a say. We would love to hear. People have stopped movement. Like we will table a resolution if there's questions. I know we love to be challenged, right? Like we work for you, we work for the people, but we don't be having nobody yet.
Right, come out.
Right.
Come.
We need the people.
We need people to see us, and we need to be intentional about that. And that's why, and you're going to your question about Franklin County as an employer reflecting the community. That's why we created programs such as County Futures in order to have that extra outreach to provide that support to people we able to recruit. That county government belongs to you. You can work for county government. You can be a part of every resident every day. You can promote and help us advance service excellence and progress. It's not just words, it's actions, because you got be in the community where the people are, and that's why we're having events where we're out in the community. We're going to local coffee shops. We're starting to do these things. We got 2 mobile units that will be going into as many neighborhoods as we can, bringing the government, Franklin County, to individual residents.
Commissioner Boyce.
I was just going to bring that up and say that we got the mobile units, but he covered it. So.
Let's give them a round of applause. These are your county leaders. These are the people who are working for you, working for our community, working to build stuff together for you. So we ask that you, like Commissioner Crawley charges, come find out, challenge us with county dollars. And we want to thank the Commissioner Crawley, Commissioner Boyce, and county administration for adding your insights and what we have been doing and what we need to do to build a better community. Thank you.